$5,000 gets you a really nice looking BMW, and some of them don't even have that many miles. But I've owned many BMWs and I can attest there's certain models that are getting extraordinarily expensive to look after. Our E60 M5 here is a 2006. I want to talk about this as an example. I want to give you some of the rundown why in fact some of the used BMWs are some of the most expensive cars you'll ever own.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
Now this was based on the F1. The infamous M5 here with the V10, the S85 engine was one such engine that was extraordinarily high revving, fun, exciting, and I love this car. That's why I still own this. But one of the main reasons why a used BMW is so expensive, when they're new, everything works. All the pipes, everything's sealed up. This S85 engine, when it was brand new, it's absolutely amazing. But as it sees some wear and tear, there are some other issues that you start to see with BMWs. They're not driven like a Honda Accord. They're not driven like a Toyota Camry. Rather, most people who drive BMWs drive them because they deliver on performance. This has 507 horsepower, made it up to a 7-speed SMG gearbox. Now that warranty's gone, some parts are crazy expensive. For example, all of a sudden you have a spring leak. Coolant hoses, pipes, they're all over the system here. Everybody knows that BMW and coolant leaks are nothing new. See, but the thing is with BMWs, they have these snap together fittings, different sides, and they snap in, then there's a key ring, it snaps together and locks in place. They're beautiful for assembly. With all the heat and cool cycles that you get with a lot of these engines, you start to get little cracks and splits. They split and then they start to leak. The problem is you can only buy these by BMW. Sure, you can get aftermarket jobbies that sort of fit them, but they never quite work the same. And if you want to change one hose like this might cost you $175. If you want to re-hose the whole system after 6 or 7 years of age, that's going to cost you $2,000 to $3,000 just for the parts. Then you have to talk about labor, because now you have an engine like this that's extremely packed in there. And almost every BMW engine is designed for packaging, performance. It's not really designed for ease of access. You can talk about pan gaskets down underneath, you know, the oil pan, not an uncommon leak point. The problem is a used BMW that starts to leak and starts to cause problems still has the same shop rate. You're still paying that $240 an hour shop rate. That doesn't get any cheaper. The problem is when you have a 1 or 2 year old BMW, the chance of going into the shop are quite low. You also have warranty. But as you have an older BMW that might be 10, 15, 20 years old, now all of a sudden, almost every time you drive it, you're probably going to identify a new leak, maybe a weird sound. And every time you have some new check engine light, you're checking that vehicle into the shop for some major repair. Now, while the S85 or the E60 M5 is probably one of the last dying breed, and I swear by this vehicle, I'm going to go down in flames owning this car strictly because it's the last of one of the great BMWs. A high revving, naturally aspirated V10 engine. You will never see an engine like this again. But that being said, every single part, because it's lower production numbers, very expensive, unique parts that you won't find in a vast majority of cars. To have that level of exclusivity, you're going to come with a cost. A lot of BMW engines all have that little nuance, that little glitch, that little gremlin that unfortunately translates to big dollars. And with the S85, it's the rod bearings. The rod bearings in these cars were very susceptible to early wear. You start getting different particulate that translates into rod bearing failure. Now, rod bearing failure takes out your crankshaft and the works. It's a very expensive repair on any car. The sad part is with these cars here, you have to drop the subframe, you hold the cradle of the engine, you take apart the bottom of the drivetrain below, and then you basically disassemble. You can reinstall the rod bearings if you catch it in time and if you don't let the bearings take out the crank. If you get ahead of it proactively, you can probably expect to spend $12,000 to $15,000, you know, every 80, 100,000 kilometers, or about 50, 60,000 miles is where you would actually expect to start replacing those bearings. You also have issues with the SMG pump, because this is essentially a flappy paddle gearbox in these vehicles that unfortunately has had prone issues with the pump. The problem is they don't make them anymore. So now you're dealing with a part that might need a rebuild. If you're lucky, you'll find one online for $20,000, and you might have to take on a song and a dance and send it out for repair. Right under here, you actually have the variable valve timing, what they call Vanos system. And there's solenoids that run your variable valve timing. They start making noise. If your Vanos system stops working, you could actually wind up in a scenario where all of a sudden you lose that power down low, or you don't have the breathing up top, because that's what variable valve timing, it allows the timing to adjust to allow it to give you that, you know, that great bottom end throttle response and top end output. So unfortunately, parts like the SMG, these Vanos systems, and of course the rod bearings are some of the big issues in a car like this. Not to mention when you're dealing with every BMW. Cooling lines, these hoses, those are common areas that fail on almost every BMW, and it translates to thousands of dollars out of your pocket. So a cheap used BMW will always be an expensive car to own. And there's other costs when you're driving a BMW. Almost every BMW has expensive run flat tires. You've come across a car, maybe the tires are down in wear and tread, and you think, hey, that's okay, I'll swap out the tires, and you go buy this used car, you think it was a great deal. Did you realize a full set of run flats on most of these BMWs are gonna cost you a couple grand? You're at $400 or $500 a skin, especially on something that's more of a 19 or 20 inch rubber like we have right here. We have a ZR rubber, and this is not gonna be a cheap tire to replace. Run flats, high performance, Z-rated tires on a lot of these cars, or certainly speed rated, means you're gonna spend a lot of money for tires. Don't discount it. Tires are expensive. Brakes like down here are very expensive. These cross-drilled ventilated brakes you find on this M5, as well as many other BMWs you're finding, even if they're not cross-drilled, many of them are larger than many other cars. If you're thinking Toyota versus BMW, that's a big reason. Sure, they've got great braking power, great performance, they handle wonderfully, but it's all that rubber hitting the road that costs money. So tires, brakes are huge money, as are the suspension parts. So if all of a sudden you think there's a clunking noise, trust me, that clunking noise could translate to $4,500 out of your pocket. Another thing that's common with BMWs, now we have a heads-up display right here, you'll notice, but unfortunately that means you need a special windshield. And right up here, this windshield has a crack in it right now. And unfortunately, any windshield that BMW's rocking that has heads-up display has a special film coating. This glass is actually discontinued. Last time I called about trying to get this windshield replaced, I found out there was one windshield left in North America. I don't know, how do you change a windshield? And it wasn't even in the city. I had to shop around, and as it was, they quoted me $3,500. So a used BMW with a cracked windshield, with worn tires and worn brakes, right there, it could cost you $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. And we're not even talking about rod bearings. If you find yourself a car like an M5 or an M6 with the S85, and that car happens to have significant miles, maybe 70,000 miles, and there's no history of doing rod bearings, you might as well consider and budget for that as well. You open the door here on these cars, and you can hear, do you hear that noise? That's the SMG pump priming the system. If you open the door and you don't hear that humming noise, then you might have an SMG pump issue. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars to fail. Also, not to mention the rear differential. They're known to eat those up as well. So there's a lot of fragile parts in these cars. For that time that you actually wind up with a check engine light, which feels like it's some of the BMWs that ends up taking almost every second week. Every time you want them just to look at the car, even for a little hiccup, a burp, or even a fart, and it spits out a check engine light, you're stuck paying 250 beans just to look at it. And then we won't even talk about shop supplies and gloves and lubricants that you're gonna need and knee pads, but that all comes when you buy a BMW, and a used cheap BMW. And from my experience, the cheaper that used BMW is, the more chances you're gonna be paying out of pocket. It's almost indirectly proportional. For $10,000, I was able to pick up that beautiful 335i that I had, rear-wheel drive, 6-speed manual, had the bone-colored interior with walnut type of finishing. It was an absolute gorgeous unit. Definitely the driver's potential, had the JB4 tune, otherwise relatively bone stock. We ended up putting downpipes on it, intake cone on it, but realistically, that car was problems right from the get-go. It only had 60,000 miles on it, but it already had a high-pressure fuel pump. Those cost thousands of dollars. It had a full set of fuel injectors. Those cost thousands of dollars, but it also had wastegate rattle, and if you have to change wastegate, you're dealing with 2 turbos and labor, $6,000. It also had coolant leaks. I had numerous pipes I had to replace. I spent another $800 on coolant pipes that I changed. There was also an oil filter housing on this side. I had to change the 2 gaskets. I did it myself. The gaskets were cheap, but it cost me about 7 hours on the driveway to actually fix that. Shop rates, that would have easily been another $1,000 or $1,500 to get that fixed. So every time I turned around, if I didn't fix it myself, it was probably going to be a $2,000, $3,000 repair, and I was doing that almost every second week. That $10,000 BMW N54 powered 335 probably could have easily cost me 20 grand over the course of 2 years. Fortunately, I was able to do a lot of the work myself. Same thing with our BMW X5. Now, the E90 was a wonderful vehicle. We had the diesel. At about 230,000 kilometers, we started developing problems. You know, your EGR system got plugged off. I had to clean that up. I had to replace a valve on the intake manifold. Had to change out the airbags on the back twice. Those cost you several $100s each. plus my own labor. Talked about a fuel injector, which cost $2,000 for the one fuel injector, not to mention the module, which cost thousands of dollars. So in the beginning, it was amazing, but as time went on and some miles started adding up, even the X5 started turning into a real big money pit. A lot of times, buying a brand new BMW is often the best way to go. With lease rates being favorable and with finance rates being what they are, sometimes it makes more sense, especially for people that are not great DIYers, to actually buy a brand new BMW. I have the ability to fix a lot of my own cars, and unless it's one of the major issues, I generally try to tackle a lot of my own maintenance, and that is managed to keep a lot of these vehicles in the fleet. But regardless of a lot of these costs, and regardless of the fact of the expense of a lot of these parts, I find myself continually drawn into cars like this because life's too short to drive boring cars. Why would I want to drive a Corolla when I can drive an M5? Yes, it gets expensive. Yes, it's a little bit pricey for fuel, for insurance, for parts. But man, is it ever exciting when you get behind the wheel and you start pulling gears. I was also a glutton for punishment, driving the worst of the brand. Not the worst from a driver's perspective, but the worst for reliability. S85, N54. Even the BMW diesel was a little bit of an obscure unit. Even though it's reliable, it had its own nuances. So I always seem to gravitate to those unique, interesting, oddball BMWs, and I face the price. You know what? If you're one of those and you love BMWs, right there's a list of some of the best BMWs that you could ever consider buying if you don't want to be stuck into something like that that's a money pit. Check those out. With all of that said, everybody, have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Bye.